What up, YouTube? Ed Weskergriff coming back with a completely different type of video for my channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Game of Thrones Season 8, the finale, my thoughts on it, thoughts on Season 8, and my overall thoughts on the Game of Thrones series as a whole. So if you've never seen Game of Thrones, you're probably not going to want to watch this video. Or if you have seen Game of Thrones and you're not caught up to the finale, there's going to be tons of spoilers in here, so I highly suggest not watching the video. But this video was requested by several different people. They were asking me what my thoughts were on the show. Since they know I'm such a big fan and I do all the Rittenhouse Archives autograph cards and set collect the Game of Thrones cards. So a lot of people were curious what my thoughts were. And overall, the word I would use to describe Season 8 is content. I'm content with how the show ended. I thought it could have been a lot better, yes. The bar was set extremely high for Game of Thrones because the first couple of seasons of the show are really, really perfect television. You can't really do any better. And the main reason why those first couple seasons were so good is because Dave and Dan, who are the showrunners, were adapting the material from the Song of Ice and Fire books. All the great signature moments of Game of Thrones have come via the books, whether it be the Red Wedding, whether it be Ned's beheading, the Mountain versus the Viper, Jon Snow getting stabbed. All these moments, all these signature moments that you know Game of Thrones from, are all from the books. And it's very hard for an adapter to adapt something that has no source material. And Game of Thrones is in the unique situation of being one of the only live-action medias that I know that's in that type of situation. You've seen that type of situation happen with animation before, specifically Japanese animation. Being that I am also into anime a little bit, that has happened with series such as Hellsing, and it has happened with another anime franchise called Full Metal Alchemist. So there is precedent for it to happen in media, but for happening in live action media, as far as I know, this is one of, if not the only time that this has happened. So it's a difficult situation for both parties because George is a well-documented slow writer. And when I say George, I mean George R. R. Martin, the creator of Song of Ice and Fire and creator of Game of Thrones, which is the same thing. But Dave and Dan originally signed on to be adapters. They signed on to adapt the books. And George last released the last book in 2011. There's still 2 more books that need to be released, Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. Winds of Winter has been in the writing process since 2011. Do the math. It's been a very, very long time. The show was just starting when George was writing on Winds of Winter. So it's extreme. They were put in a very difficult situation, Dave and Dan. So I don't want to come down on them too hard like the entire internet is coming down on them. I feel like they're getting heavily, heavily criticized. For some things, rightfully so. My biggest gripe with the last couple seasons, Season 7 and Season 8, is really just the pace of those 2 seasons. Because Game of Thrones perfectly had a formula, and that formula was a 10-episode per season formula, building up to a dramatic conclusion for each season finale. It worked great for 6 seasons, and then they decided to change that in Season 7 and Season 8. And you get Season 7 and Season 8 for parts of those seasons. It feels a little wonky how characters are just going all over the place. They're appearing here, they're appearing there. It just seems that they're traveling at the speed of light, and things are just getting condensed, and it feels like a sprint to the finish line. Now, I said I was content with Season 8, and I truly am. There were some things I really didn't like. I really did not like how the White Walkers, and this is my main complaint with Season 8, the White Walkers were built up for almost 7 seasons. And in fact, the entire Season 7 is just pretty much a hype up of the Walkers. And the show started with the Walkers. So the books start with the Walkers too. and they built that all up to end it in one episode. It's just the execution of that was just not done properly, in my opinion. The episode itself that I'm talking about, The Long Night, it was a well produced episode, well directed episode, music, visuals, it had everything. But it was too forced. There's no reason why that could not have been longer, could have been more episodes. The arc of that could have been at least 5 episodes, and it would have been more satisfactory, I feel, for the overall fan base. Now, the other issue that people have with Season 8 is Daenerys Targaryen's turn into a villain. And this is actually one of the things I like about Season 8, because I feel if you read the books and you follow the show very, very closely, her turn into a tyrant is very believable for me. I see some people saying that it's not believable, it's a character assassination, it just doesn't fit tonally. And I definitely disagree with that. I feel there's definitely more clues and more hints in the book that she's turning into her father and she's turning into a tyrant. In the show, they definitely show that a lot. And I hear the popular catchphrase going around is foreshadowing is not character development. And while this is true, yes, they definitely were building up to her turning. It's just that the problem was that they didn't allot enough time in the season for it to blossom. So, her turning, I'm okay with, because that's the route that her character was always going to take. So that to me is fine. But you see a lot of people are really, really upset. And I can understand it, because the show did that to one of my favorite characters. And this oftentimes gets completely glossed over. But you can roll back to Season 5 and Stannis Baratheon. Now, Season 5 is the first season where the show really diverges from the book material. By this point, Dave and Dan are just running on notes from George about some key events that are going to happen here and there, but there's really no material to adapt like they were adapting from the previous seasons. And Dave and Dan decide to just absolutely destroy the character of Stannis Baratheon, who, if you read the books, he's really a different character. They made him a zealot, a religious zealot on the show, which he's not in the books. He's more of an agnostic, if I can say that properly. He just uses Melisandre because her god has power, so he wants to leverage that power and use it towards helping him save the realm. And you see this a lot in Season 5. He essentially gets taken out by Ramsay's 20 good men, who just come into the camp and eviscerate his camp, and then he winds up burning his daughter. He kills Shireen in a sacrifice, and he loses his entire army. There's no fucking way that the greatest military commander in Westeros, a guy who is feared by the likes of Tywin Lannister, that he would wind up, A, losing, and B, he would never burn his daughter. That is not going to happen in the books. Now, Dave and Dan justified it on their Inside the Episodes, which a lot of people have been killing them for Season 8, because, to their point, they have been saying some really foolish things in the Season 8 interviews. But they justified this back in Season 5 by saying that Shireen will get burned, and this came from George. But context is key. And there's no way that Stannis is going to sanction the burning of his daughter. It's physically impossible to happen in the books because Stannis is hundreds of thousands of miles away from Shireen. Shireen's at the wall with Melisandre. And Stannis is near Winterfell. It's just not going to happen. So I can understand the anger that's out there with a lot of Daenerys fans, but I think the main difference that we need to look at here is that ultimately I do think this will go with her book ending. I do think this is her ultimate endgame. So I just don't see her ending another way in the books. Now, the books will provide a lot greater context and texture to her ultimate downfall. Whereas with Stannis, I don't know where his ending's going to be. He might even live out through the rest of the series. I know George has came out several years ago saying that Stannis is very much alive in the books, and he came out, I would say, a couple weeks ago and said there's various characters who are dead on the show who are not going to be dead come the end of the book series. So maybe Stannis is one of these characters that makes it through. But one thing is for sure, what he did in the television show, there's no way he's doing that in the book series. That would be pretty friggin' mind-blowing and totally out of character. Now, a lot of people are also agitated with how Bran got the throne, and honestly, I don't see how Bran's going to get the throne in the books. At least that blueprint has not been laid down yet. He's trying to be a tree wizard, and at least in the books, when you become a tree wizard, you really cannot... you're stationary. You're not going to be moving. You basically become a tree. So I don't see how he would become king in the books. So maybe Dave and Dan did this to preserve George's ending. Maybe it was agreed upon. I'm not entirely sure. It fits on the show to an extent. I don't have a problem with Bran becoming king on the show. I just don't like the way that they, at least on the show, push Jon Snow away from the throne. Obviously, they beat the hammer home that he did not want the throne. They made that perfectly clear through pretty much all his dialogue the last 2 seasons. But the obvious choice for the throne then would have been Gendry, since he is Robert Baratheon's bastard. But they wanted to hammer home the theme of breaking the wheel. So from that, I can see Bran getting the throne. But again, we don't know where this is going within the books. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think if those books do come out, Winds of Winter and Dream of Spring, you will definitely see a reboot or a reimagining of Game of Thrones down the line, maybe 15, 20, 25 years from now. That's a big if on if those books come out, though. Because from all intents and purposes, the books are supposed to be 3,000 pages. I think I heard Winds is supposed to be 3,500 pages, so it's going to be insanely big book. And then George hasn't even started on A Dream of Spring, so who knows when and if that'll come out. But if, like I said, if those books come out, you will see a reimagining of the series. And overall, Game of Thrones, I loved it. It was a fantastic television show. It could have been the best television show of all time, but unfortunately the last 2 seasons have knocked it down a peg. I would say it's probably a top 5 television show of all time. The music, the acting, the direction were all phenomenal. The effects, fantastic. And ultimately, it's the ball's in George Court on how this story will canonically end and what will happen to these characters. So Westeros is still very much alive. Game of Thrones is not technically over. And if you did not like the Season 8 ending, there's always 2 more books coming out with a completely different or somewhat the same but different variants of that story. So those are just basically some of my thoughts on the show and on Season 8. Enjoyed the ride that I was on with it. It was phenomenal, and it was a lot of fun. There was definitely some things that frustrate me, not being a complete homer, and not being blindly loyal to the show and saying everything was great. Now, there was some things, and I've gone it over in this video, but that's all I got for you guys. And if you'd like another video about me talking about this, let me know. I will do one. And I hope everyone out there enjoyed it. And leave your thoughts down below on what you thought. Thanks.